I used to believe that death was the end. But then I read something that made me afraid, of the dead who are still hungry. 3 weeks ago, in the archives of an old monastery near the Silesian border, I found a journal. No index. No author's name. Just a seal in red wax. The first page had no title, only a trembling line of handwriting. I hear it, beneath the grave. It is chewing. And it knows my name. At first, I thought I'd stumbled onto a piece of forgotten folklore. But the name in the note matched a death record from 1664, a 9-year-old child who died of undetermined causes. 3 days after her burial, her mother collapsed during dinner, eyes rolled back. 1 week later, her father was found dead, kneeling, with dried blood at the corners of his mouth. Villagers claimed they saw nothing. Heard nothing. Only one thing terrified them. The church bell rang at midnight, by itself. No one touched the rope. When the girl's grave was opened, they found the burial shroud shredded from the inside. Her mouth filled with clotted blood. 2 fingers missing. No one knew what to call it. But from that moment on, the entire village changed how they buried their dead. They packed earth into the mouth. Tied the jaw shut with iron wire. Placed stones over the eyes and knives across the chest. Not to honor the dead, but to keep them from coming back. The vampire we think we know, seductive, bloodthirsty, emerging from the shadows, does not exist here. There are no capes. No moonlit rituals. No crimson goblets. Only a creature lying motionless in its coffin, feeding on itself, and dragging the living down with it. Its name isn't in the Bible. It doesn't appear in romantic literature. It survives only in whispers, passed from one graveyard to the next. In German, it's called something that has no clean translation. But roughly, it means the corpse eater. Nachzehrer. And if these accounts are true, if it never vanished, only imprisoned beneath ancient rites, then perhaps what we should fear isn't the darkness itself, but the chewing sound, coming from beneath the earth. Part 1, The Origin of the Nachzehrer Legend. Before it was called Nachzehrer, this creature had no name. It was only recognized through slow, unexplained deaths. Families dying off one by one without answers. Graves unearthed, revealing truths no one wanted to face. The concept of the Nachzehrer began to appear in the late 17th century, in the eastern regions of Germany, Saxony, Silesia, and Pomerania, places once devastated by plagues, wars, and famine. There, people spoke of a being unlike any vampire found in Western literature. It did not walk, did not attack, did not transform. It simply lay still, and ate. In ancient folk belief, death was not merely an end. It was a ritual, a transition of the soul from the realm of the living to the spiritual beyond. And if that ritual was broken, by suicide, by accident, by dying alone without prayer, the soul could not move on. The corpse became an empty vessel. No longer a person, but not entirely dead either. A void. A spiritual breach, where hunger could enter, and remain. During every major outbreak, from the Black Death to localized epidemics, villagers feared the first to die. Not because they carried disease, but because they could become the root of a spiritual hunger. If that death happened in isolation, without ritual, without a priest, the corpse might not rest in peace. And if it wasn't properly dealt with, the rest would die one by one. Unlike vampires who infect through bites, the Nachzehrer spreads through presence. It doesn't need to touch you. It only needs to know your name. In 1725, theologian Michael Ranft attempted to explain this phenomenon in his book De Mastication Mortuorum, translated as On the Chewing of the Dead in Their Graves. He documented dozens of cases from Saxony and Thuringia, where corpses were exhumed after a series of village deaths. Common signs included corpses remaining intact after being buried for many weeks. Traces of blood around the mouth. Burial shrouds torn from the inside. Michael Ranft believed this was simply a chemical reaction after death, gas buildup, muscle contractions. But villagers didn't care about theory. They cared about the chewing. And the fact that when they performed decapitation rituals, the dying stopped. From then on, rural communities began forming their own counter-rituals against the Nachzehrer, not based on scripture, not sanctioned by the church. Burying the dead face down. Stuffing earth or stones into the mouth. Binding the jaw with wire or ash. Placing a blade across the chest to block resurrection. None of these actions were meant to honor the dead. They were meant to restrain them. So what is the Nachzehrer, really? A supernatural being? Or a manifestation of collective fear in the face of an incomplete death? That question remains unanswered. But one truth is undeniable. Not all places bury their dead so they may rest in peace. Some bury them, so no one else has to die. Part 2, The Unrest Dead, the self-consuming process and attack mechanism of the Nachzehrer. If a soul cannot pass on, then what happens to the body it leaves behind? In the Nachzehrer legend, death does not mark an ending, but a failed transitional state. Instead of decomposing, the corpse begins a process of eating itself, not to escape, but to activate a new form of existence, a hunger for memory, rooted in the living who share blood ties. Stage 1, Eating the Burial Shroud. The first behavior recorded in 17th century manuscripts was eating the burial shroud. Villagers believed that the cloth used to wrap the body was not merely an item, but the final spiritual barrier. When it was torn apart, the hunger began. Not for blood, but for life energy, slowly drawn from the still breathing. Hundreds of folk accounts mention chewing sounds beneath the grave, echoing on moonless nights, when entire villages seemed cloaked in the scent of damp earth and slow decay. Stage 2, Eating itself. After the shroud, the corpse would begin to consume its own body. First, the fingers. Then, the skin around the abdomen. Finally, the heart, believed to be the emotional link to the living. This process was called in ancient documents reverse decay, not decomposition toward nothingness, but a parasitic activation, where the soul does not depart but turns inward, surviving off memory. Attack mechanism, pulling instead of pursuing. Unlike traditional vampires that prowl at night, Nachzehrer never leaves its grave. It does not attack outward, it pulls you inward, a draining mechanism from afar. Its method. A spiritual bond left unresolved with loved ones through it, it draws life energy via memory, emotion, and the power of names. Villagers told stories like a child refusing food for 3 days. A mother suffering seizures, gasping at night for no known reason. A father wasting away over mere weeks. All of it usually began after the death of a family member. According to legends from the Pomerania region, the most terrifying thing was not the corpse, but the memory of the dead. The more one remembered, mourned, or clung emotionally, the faster the energy was drained. The most chilling phrase passed between villagers was, "If the dead still remembers your name, you will be next." In certain Slavic folk texts, it is believed that those drained by a Nachzehrer don't die suddenly, but wither away day by day, as if life itself is being gnawed away, from a distance. Though typically motionless underground, some variants say the Nachzehrer can temporarily manifest as animals, especially a white pig or dog, usually seen around the home of someone near death. But they don't bite. They don't howl. They simply stand and watch, as if counting the final breaths of the victim. If someone saw a white pig 3 nights in a row, a death in the household was almost certain. Nachzehrer does not rise like a zombie. It does not wander the cemetery. It lies still, slowly decaying, gnawing at itself. To maintain the connection to the living. The corpse becomes an anchor, embedded deep within the earth, dragging others down with it. Do not fear what walks at night. Fear what has lain still for centuries, still chewing, still remembering. And still calling your name in silence. Part 3, Signs and Strange Phenomena Around Graves Suspected to Harbor a Nachzehrer. If a restless death can kill again, then how can we know when a Nachzehrer has begun to feed? Many folktales from the Silesian region recount strange phenomena. Church bells tolling at midnight. No bell ringer, no wind. Only the sound, echoing like a warning, when the hunger beneath the earth begins to stir. In the village of Stern, during the famine year of 1691, on a moonless night, the bell rang 4 times in succession. 3 days later, a villager died. 7 days later, 2 more followed. When the first grave was exhumed, the corpse was still red with color, blood pooled around the mouth, the burial shroud torn to pieces. In local legends from Pomerania, villagers believed the Nachzehrer could temporarily manifest as an animal, usually a white pig or a shadowless dog. They did not attack. They simply watched. No one ever saw them walk, but on the nights they appeared, someone in the house would die within 3 days. At the Chemnitz border region in 1786, herds of livestock refused to graze near the graveyard, and horses would neigh frantically and break into a sweat when passing by a specific grave. When the villagers finally dug it up, they found the corpse's tongue was chewed to pulp. The mouth was filled with dried blood. And the ribs had collapsed inward, as if something inside had tried to press out. In Saxony folklore, common phenomena included children refusing food, suddenly growing frail. Adults wasting away, as if drained of vitality. Yet no wounds, no injuries, and no clear medical cause. The people believe that once a Nachzehrer remembers someone, the spiritual tether between death and life begins to tighten. No physical contact is needed. No closeness required. Just a name. In one story recorded in Dresden, a woman died of plague. Soon after, her daughter began dreaming of her mother chewing something in the dark, night after night. The girl deteriorated rapidly, and died within 9 days. When the mother's grave was opened, villagers documented. Her mouth was wide open, her lips torn, blood dripping between her teeth. But she had been buried for 4 weeks. Many folk beliefs describe these signs as omens of a Nachzehner's awakening. A sighing sound from deep underground during the night. Thick fog enveloping only a specific section of the graveyard, while the rest of the area remains clear. Living people feeling chest pain, tightness, breathlessness, only when standing near a particular grave. Household candles refusing to stay lit for 3 consecutive nights. Some villagers said that whenever the Nachzehrer began to feed, they could feel the air in the house growing heavier. As if something unseen was slowly sitting on their chest, inch by inch. Ancient methods for detecting a hungered grave. When these signs appeared, villagers did not wait for a priest. They had crude, but disturbingly accurate, methods for identifying which grave was the source. 1. Keeping watch for 3 nights straight near the cemetery, listening for chewing or strange sounds from beneath the soil. 2. Using an ash staff, drawing a trail of ash from the house to each grave. If the ash changed color, it meant a connection had formed. 3. Lighting a candle and walking around the cemetery at dawn. If the flame extinguished suddenly at a specific spot, that grave was marked as the feeding ground. Part 4. Forbidden records and evidence in historical documents. If the Nachzehrer was merely a product of medieval peasant imagination, then why do references to this creature appear repeatedly in official documents, from theologians, physicians, even administrative reports? And more importantly, why have most of these records been banned from circulation? In 1725, a German theologian named Michael Ranft published a 300-page study titled De Mastication Mortuorum in Tumulis, on the phenomenon of the dead chewing in their graves. In it, he compiled over 30 cases of exhumed corpses from Saxony, Thuringia, and the Bohemian border, all sharing disturbing similarities. Bodies not decomposed even after more than 3 weeks underground. Blood in the mouth, burial shrouds torn from within. Tongues chewed to pieces, with some corpses bearing teeth marks on their own arms. Ranft attempted to explain the phenomenon through biological hypotheses. Gas buildup, facial muscle contractions, mouth opens, blood seeps out. But he ended one passage with a chilling admission. No matter how one tries to explain it, this phenomenon always occurs just before the next deaths begin. Many manuscripts involving the Nachzehrer were never published, instead stored secretly in mountain monasteries or abandoned churches after the Reformation. Among them, funeral records from 1683 in Berlot, 8 members of a single family died within 18 days. A note reads, "Upon opening the first grave, the corpse's lips were torn, and the mouth was filled with blood." An internal Cistercian monastery report from 1709. Suspected grave number 33. No priest is allowed near it. Only the gravekeeper knows the binding rite. Many of these documents were stamped superstitio ruralis, peasant superstition. Yet within them appear detailed exorcism rituals, inexplicably penned by mainstream clergy themselves. In Lower Silesia in 1813, a municipal health report documented an unusual case. A miner died in a cave-in. After his burial, the nearby settlement reported a wave of extreme exhaustion, anemia, comas, refusal to eat. Exhumed after 27 days, blood still fresh around the mouth, the body still warm, and missing fingers. Following the execution of a ritual known as the head extraction, detaching the head and stuffing the mouth with earth, the affliction ceased within 72 hours. The report was later removed from the official medical archives and remained buried in a dusty file cabinet in Dresden until rediscovered in 1998 by an independent researcher. Why were these records buried? Not because of a lack of evidence, but because they could not be explained through faith. In Christian doctrine, death is considered release. Once blessed and buried, the soul ascends. But the Nachzehrer does not fit that framework. It is neither demon nor wandering spirit. It is a gap, a flaw in the sacred cycle. And for a system built upon unwavering belief in heaven and redemption, the concept of the dead feeding on the living through memory is simply unacceptable. Within the Vatican and various European ecclesiastical archives, many files remain classified. Some scholars believe that records relating to plague graves or contagious burials are still sealed. Not to avoid public panic, but because they challenge the very foundation of life and death as described by Scripture. Part 5, Secret Rituals of Restraint and the Silent War Against the Dead. Once the signs appeared, a midnight bell tolling without a ringer, restless livestock, children collapsing without cause, villagers didn't wait for explanations. They acted. Swiftly, quietly, and with grim determination. Because they believed that if the Nachzehrer continued to feed, death would spread like cracks in dry soil, slow, silent, and unstoppable. One striking fact. There are no records of priests directly performing Nachzehrer restraint rituals. Instead, those who intervened were midwives, healers, and folk doctors. Those living near graveyards, not to guard them, but to observe subtle changes. A kind of silent warrior, not fighting demons, but the hunger of unfinished death. Common rituals of restraint. 1. Stuffing the corpse's mouth with earth or stones. O purpose, to block jaw movement, prevent the chewing from starting. O variants included, sacred ash, beeswax, or coarse salt. 2. Binding the jaw tightly with ash-soaked cloth or metal wire. O seen as a mouth lock. O often accompanied by a silent, wordless incantation. 3. Placing a knife or sickle across the chest of the corpse. O metal objects were meant to cut any lingering spiritual ties. O the sickle symbolized, if the corpse rises, it will wound itself. 4. Burying the body face down, head turned westward. O turned away from the village, to prevent the soul from finding its way back. O some regions even rotated the coffin toward the sunset, symbolizing eternal closure. 5. Guarding the grave for 9 consecutive nights. O this period was believed to be a spiritual window of transformation. Oh, if 9 nights passed without signs, the soul would finally rest. If these preventive rituals failed, and death still spread, the community would escalate to higher rites, exhumation and neutralization. 1. Exhumation at night, typically during a new moon. Oh, belief, weak moonlight diminished supernatural energy. 2. Beheading the corpse. Oh, using a pickaxe, shovel, or cleaver. Oh, the head was sometimes placed between the legs, or buried in a separate grave to disrupt the corpse's spiritual memory. 3. Filling the throat with earth, ash, salt, or garlic. Oh, clogging the feeding path, severing the spiritual link to the living. 4. Covering the eyes and placing stones in the sockets. Oh, it was believed the Nachzehrer drew energy from visual memory of loved ones. If it couldn't see, it couldn't remember. 5. Burning the heart, if present, or placing a heavy object on the chest. Oh, to prevent reconnection, in case the restraint ritual failed. These rites were never publicly acknowledged. Those who performed them did so in silence, passing the knowledge down through generations. If they failed, they vanished. If they succeeded, the village pretended nothing had happened. In one case from Thuringia, a midwife named Margaretha was summoned after 5 members of a family died in succession. She exhumed the first victim, beheaded the corpse, filled the mouth with ash, and sang a sorrowful lullaby in an ancient dialect. That same night, the coughing fits of the surviving family members ceased. We do not bury the dead to say goodbye. We bury them, to lock them away. Anonymous note, written in the margin of a farmer's journal, 1798. Why has the church never acknowledged these rituals? Simply put, they lie outside ecclesiastical control. They are acts of survival, not sacred rites. Between death and disappearance, the people chose methods that were brutal, but effective. Part 6, The Silent Contagion, Why One Death Could Kill an Entire Village. In other legends, vampires spread through bites. In science, plagues spread through air, water, or physical contact. But with the Nachzehrer, contagion requires no touch. No blood. No rising from the grave. It spreads through memory. Through unresolved emotional ties. Through invisible threads still connecting the living to the dead. Folk belief in Saxony held that the first death in a village, if it came suddenly, unprepared, without ritual, would leave behind a spiritual crack. And from that crack, a hungry presence could slip through. The corpse didn't need to move. It only needed to exist. Like an unlatched door between the world of the living and the world of decay. In a recorded account from Pomerania, a mother died first, supposedly from a chill. Her daughter followed, mysteriously, 9 days later. The husband withered away over 3 weeks without eating, then died. Villagers believed they loved too much, so death couldn't leave them. The Nachzehrer feeds on those with the strongest emotional ties. Not randomly, but in a sequence. Closest relative, former caretaker, the one who remembers them most. This mechanism was known in folklore as the chain of mourning. An eerie belief persisted across ancient Silesian villages. If you speak the name of the dead too soon, they will remember you. In ancient views, a name was more than a label. It was a spiritual locator. And if the living invoked the dead's name too often, with too much grief, too much longing, they unknowingly fed the unrest corpse. Folk researcher Paul Drexler documented this pattern. In 64 cases across eastern Germany, a single death triggered widespread exhaustion within a 500-meter radius. No pathogens. No physical cause. Just a communal wasting, which locals called the death wind illness. Trees dried up. Livestock stopped reproducing. Pregnant women miscarried. Children refused to eat. It all began with one grave, and ended only when that corpse was subjected to the proper ritual restraints. In folk belief, death doesn't sever the ties between people. It alters them. If someone passes without proper rites, those ties become a reverse tether, pulling others toward the same fate. And the next to die isn't killed. They are simply pulled down, one by one, until the thread is finally cut. A documented case in the southern mountains near Dresden, 1773. A widow died in solitude. No funeral was held. Within 2 weeks. Oh, her closest neighbor died of exhaustion. Oh, her niece developed sleepwalking, spoke to shadows, then took her own life. Oh, the gravedigger who buried her went mad and was found weeping among the graves. When villagers exhumed her body, they found burial cloth shredded by teeth, her heart missing, and her mouth still open, as if mid-chew. After they performed the beheading ritual and filled her mouth with ash, the strange occurrences stopped immediately. Part 7. Why the Church wants to deny the existence of Nachzehrer. If the Nachzehrer were merely a product of folk superstition, then why did so many priests record its phenomenon? Why do dozens of historical documents exist within monastic orders, yet are never allowed to be read from the pulpit? And if it truly doesn't exist, why does the Church feel the need to deny it so absolutely? In Christian theology, death is a release of the soul. The soul is judged. It either ascends to heaven, descends to hell, or, in rare cases, lingers temporarily in purgatory. There is no room for those who refuse to go anywhere. No theology for the hunger that remains underground. No doctrine that accounts for a corpse feeding on the living through memory. If the Nachzehrer exists, it would mean the entire theological framework has been flawed from the start. The Church maintains control through the idea of absolute death. Belief is the most powerful tool of any religion. And death is the cornerstone upon which faith is built. If people began to believe that some corpses do not decay, some souls refuse to leave, some forces exist outside the authority of God, then the mechanisms of heaven and hell lose their grip. In many cases, when villagers approached priests for help, the answer was often, "Do not speak of it. That is heresy. A pagan delusion." And when they insisted on taking action, their documentation was often seized, destroyed, or quietly archived. A researcher in Austria found 10 detailed exorcism records inside a closed monastery, each sealed with the label, "Internal use only, not for distribution." Why would superstition require secrecy? To the Church, acknowledging the Nachzehrer means rethinking everything. Death. The soul. Judgment. Worse, it might lead to the collapse of ecclesiastical control over funeral rites, the unraveling of faith in salvation, and the terrifying belief that a world exists beyond divine punishment. Because the Nachzehrer does not seek punishment. It is not evil. It is simply hungry. And that hunger is born of sorrow, loneliness, and a forgotten death. If the old folk beliefs are true, then no ritual, no confession, no drop of holy water can stop a corpse from remembering the names of those it once loved. And that, above all else, is the most terrifying idea. Not demons, not hell, but a silent creature that no divine authority can contain. Part 8. Does the Nachzehrer exist? And what if it never left? We've walked through centuries of forgotten history. We've unearthed forbidden documents. We've stepped into ancient graveyards where bells ring without hands, and where the hunger of the dead could still consume an entire village. But the final question is not, does the Nachzehrer exist? It is, what if it never left, and what has been feeding it until now? Most ancient legends fade with time. But the Nachzehrer, a being with no face, no footsteps, and no fresh corpses left behind, is still whispered about even in the 21st century. And the reason is simple. It doesn't need to be seen. It only needs to be remembered. As long as fear, memory, and doubt remain, the Nachzehrer still has something to feed on. Dracula can be put on the big screen. Vampires can be turned into Hollywood myths. But the Nachzehrer has no face. No lines to speak. No body to portray. It is only a forgotten name, but never erased. A corpse in an abandoned graveyard. A loved one who died alone. A dream where you hear dry chewing sounds that no one else can hear. If you've ever lost someone, and couldn't let go. If you've ever looked at a grave and felt something staring back. If you've ever dreamed of a deceased person, calling your name in a voice that wasn't quite theirs. Then maybe you're not haunted. You're being gnawed. The Nachzehrer is not a monster. It is a consequence. It is what happens when grief goes unburied. When death remains incomplete. And when memory becomes the rope that pulls the living underground. Tonight, if you walk past an old graveyard, stop. Not to pray, but to listen. Because sometimes, the scariest thing isn't footsteps behind you. It's the faint chewing beneath your feet. As if something still remembers you.